Your boss drops a meeting on your calendar for Thursday for an hour, and it says project updates, and that's all it says. It's in the title, and the description is empty. What you can come to your boss with is saying, hey, I need a little bit more context to make sure this meeting is valuable, both for you as well as for me. And then ask for what are the things you need. And you know what the things you need are? Probably things like, hey, you said project updates, but what's your goal at the end of the session? Are there specific updates you want to have covered? Because it's the worst thing in the world is going into a session and say, let's brainstorm, and everyone just looks at each other and be like, how are we brainstorming? No, just write it down. No, that's the facilitator's job. They've got to make sure that you call out how are you going to go doing it, because there's likely stuff you need to do after that too, like aggregation and next steps. And then of course, just that, make sure at the end of every agenda you do lay out those next steps. What are the things we have to do? Who's doing it? By when? And every meeting has that flow. And if you go through that flow and you think about it at a high level, you'll actually find yourself having more effective meetings at the end of the day. So templates are a great way to start. Keep the meeting, but make sure there is intention and purpose to it. Understand why you're having it, what the whole goal is. It's not to give your project manager an update. And if, again, that's what they're asking for, take it back. Take back your stand-up.
This is going to be all about how meetings matter and how to make your meeting lives hopefully a little bit easier with better team collaboration. Mark, thank you so much for being here and joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Kind of a legend in the Atlassian world, so it's an absolute honor to have you here.
I appreciate it. I think we're going to have a good conversation today.
Yeah, super excited about this one. All right, so 3 most common reasons that I find meetings are not effective is, number 1, there's no clear purpose. Number 2, the wrong people are in the room or in the meeting. And number 3, there are no follow-ups or action items. We'll go over these pretty in depth in a little bit, but Mark, anything you want to add to this list?
Yeah, so I mean, these are the big culprits out there, and if folks haven't seen it, we actually put out some research last year called Meeting Woes and Workplace Woes, and it was all around us looking at meeting culture around the world. I think we looked at talked to 5,000 people across 4 continents, and the whole idea was to find out how are meetings actually playing out? Because again, meetings are such a simple topic, but it's such a profound and impactful one, just because we all have them. And so some of the things kind of as you put with no clear purpose, we actually found things like, what is it? Looking at my data, 60% of meetings don't have goals. And all those people that attended meetings are finding 60% don't have goals. So all of a sudden now, if I don't got a goal, of course I'm going to have the wrong people in the room because we don't know what we're trying to accomplish. And then the no follow-up or action items, we found that was another one we looked at. 54% of meetings don't have follow-up items. And you know what I always say that leads to? That leads to the next meeting. That leads to, all right, we need to schedule another meeting, and then we fall into the pitfall all over again. And so these really are the reasons why we have so many, honestly, just ineffective meetings out there. And if we can, and it's not hard to fix these either. And I think that's today we're going to spend some time talking about is these are actually pretty low lift areas to get a little bit more intentful on. And if we do that, especially people out there who are organizing meetings, who are part of these things, all of a sudden you're going to find you got more time, you've got more attention in the session, and you've actually found yourself being more effective at the end of the day. So yeah, I think these are the ones. If we can solve these, you know what, we can fix the world at some level.
Yeah, totally agree. I had a LinkedIn post a few days ago about how meetings, they don't just take up time, but they actually cost you money. And I think a lot of people overlook that aspect of it, especially if you're like a smaller team and you have a huge team meeting with everybody in your company and there's 20 people there. That's an hour of everybody's time that goes to that meeting rather than work. So 100%. You're actually wasting money. Yeah,
and it's just like, especially you go in and, another stat we had from that report was they said 72% of meetings were ineffective. And so it's like, if I think about how much, to your point, with how much time we spend, it means 72% of the time we're spending money every day is just being burnt, at that point, if meetings are ineffective. Because if we are spending that much time on these sessions. And so, I worked with a customer once where we were looking at big meetings, and they had a big executive meeting they had 50 people in it, and it was 2 hours every week. I mean, you look at the bill rate at some of these folks, and you're thousands, tens of thousands of dollars for just that meeting. And we got a little bit more intentful with it. We were able to have a good agenda. We were able to remove some content, make it async. And from there, we were able to bring that 2-hour meeting into a 1-hour meeting and make it from 50 people to 25 people. And that had a real, it helped people feel good about their time, but it had a real financial impact too, because now it's like, all right, I'm not wasting, $25K in a meeting, when I could be using that to add value somewhere else. So
true. That kind of shocks me to hear those numbers, like 75% of meetings are ineffective, 50% don't have any follow-ups. Why do you think that's still happening today on such a large scale? Why haven't people kind of realized that as of right now?
So I am of the opinion that these numbers, although they're high and they probably have gotten a little bit larger over the years, they're not completely new. It's something like, especially even before the pandemic, we lived in a meeting space culture. It still was a badge of honor, if I had a busy agenda. And I think that's we hold that as almost like if I'm busy, I'm productive. But unfortunately, that is not the same thing. It doesn't mean that we're actually adding value. And so people will go to the meetings. Like I know people who they'll get a meeting invite and they'll go to it. They don't even know what the meeting's for. And so for us, it's learning from the attendee side to be a little bit more intentional about our times. Like again, thinking about like, do I actually need to go to this? And if there's only one thing I need, can I get that in other means? And especially from the organizer side, how do we make sure that when we set up a session, we're intentful about who's there, what we're covering, what the outcome is, and that we're hitting that home? Because if we don't, to me, when I look at 72%, I imagine that half of those meetings probably didn't even need to happen because they were because of no clear purpose. They were because of no follow-up items. And so thus that number just continues to snowball. And so we can get better all of a sudden. Now that ineffectiveness will go down because meetings aren't bad. It's just bad meetings are bad.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is a really great point. So I guess we'll start digging deeper into all of that, but really the whole goal of this webinar is to make meetings faster, fewer, and more effective, kind of as we just covered. So quick agenda, we'll go over running some very efficient stand-ups and sprint planning meetings. This is kind of focused towards development teams, but I know a lot of project management teams do stand-ups as well. A lot of marketing teams, sometimes HR teams. It's becoming more common practice to do a stand-up type meeting with your team. And then we're going to talk about avoiding meetings if they're not actually necessary. And then we'll jump into using Jira and Confluence to help with your meeting processes and help collect action items, being able to turn those into actionable things after your meeting is over. And then we'll have a Q&A. But in the meantime, if anybody does have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And at the end of the webinar, we'll go over everything that came in. All right, so let's dive into the first thing.
Yeah.
So I have on my list here using Jira as a single source of truth for running sprints and stand-up meetings. Mark, do you currently have any kind of stand-ups that you do on a daily basis that you're using Jira for to leverage, make your life a little bit easier?
So it's interesting, not on a daily basis for me. I have something where my team will sync up once a week, but we do, I've worked with teams for the last decade, both our customer teams, our internal teams, really helping them to, again, get to that point of that source of truth, but then also using your data in your source of truth, especially when it comes to meetings. I think one of the biggest issues that we see is when you extract data out and you put it somewhere else and it's not linked, that data becomes immediately stale. Like something could change here and you lose it here. And this is why I remember back, pre-pandemic, I come from the agility field, and I was always a big advocate of using Jira for my stand-ups, for those daily scrums. We get together and we look at the board. I build that swim lane of like, all right, here's where we're at. Let's talk about, I would set it up where you got your columns or your statuses and you'd work from right to left. I want to focus on getting what's closest to done, and then we'll move our way to the left. But I remember working with a number of like coaches and others who were just adamant about sticky notes and, well, no, it's like we're here, put them on the walls. And I'm like, I love me a sticky note. I've got me sticky notes I still keep on my desk for things. But the problem was that data started becoming stale. All of a sudden, what was a picture over here immediately changed the moment we left that daily scrum, that daily stand-up. And so for us, we started, I worked with all types of teams to get them that if you're going to track your work, that is where you should talk about your work. And again, the beautiful thing with things like Jira is you can create your boards which have those views to allow you to look at work as it flows. I'm a big advocate of Scrum and those sorts of things, but I'm even a bigger advocate of flow that comes from like a Kanban view. And I think this is where, whether you're a marketing team, whether you're a software team, whether you're a leadership team, you're always going to have a backlog of work. And if you can run your session from where the work is, you'll find yourself in a spot where now that everything is fresh. And we even saw this too. Interrupt me if you need to, but like one of the things we actually started seeing, and we experienced too, and I don't know if others are out there, but this whole issue of especially for leadership teams, where they would have their weekly work review meetings, these big status meetings. They would have. I remember back in the day, I'd sit and it would be an all-day Thursday meeting where we'd sit down, and this was before Atlassian, and we'd spend all day talking about projects and status and things like that. And the problem is again, we would bring up a PowerPoint or we'd do something like that, and it would immediately become stale. And so one of the things that Atlassian built, over the years, and we actually put it out as, a few years ago as Atlas, which is now called Atlassian Home, is we've actually used things like projects as a project sense in Atlassian Home, as well as goals. And now we use that to status those projects. And so similar to what you would do at a team level on like a Scrum board or a Kanban board, now you have project managers, you have senior leaders being able to look and see, here are all the projects that I'm working on, or I'm watching maybe, and I'm working on, and here is their current status. And I can dive into them at any given time. And what that does is it prevents you, especially in those sorts of situations, from needing that meeting. All of a sudden, you don't need a 5-hour Thursday meeting. Every Monday morning, you get an update on your projects, and you're like, oh, okay, this is where it's at. These are the people I need to go ask questions to. I don't need to take all these other folks. So that's where, for me, whether you're a team that's, you're a development team and you're using Jira with a Kanban board, or you're using Atlassian Home and projects, whatever it is, keeping that data in one place is critical, and then actually being able to report from that place is even more important, because again, you prevent that drift. I don't know if that's what you've seen, Josh, as you've been playing in this space.
Yeah, no, that's really great. I want to dive in more about like your process of actually pulling that information out of your meeting and then into Jira. But before that, I actually want to ask about your thoughts on stand-ups in general, because there is some debate around like whether you should or shouldn't have a stand-up daily, weekly. What are your thoughts on that?
So here's I spent years as a coach, and here's my thoughts, is that if you as a team feel that you are at any given time aligned in terms of like, I could go to anyone on your team and be like, hey, what's your team working on right now? What's Josh working on? What's so-and-so working on? And you could tell me that. You don't need a stand-up. But the problem is teams think, so I know what I'm working on. That's the thing. This daily stand-up is not about you. It's about everybody else except for you. And I think, to me, that is the misconception there. The problem that happens, and you can see I've got on my soapbox now. I got a little bit more energized on that one. The problem is that people just follow the process. They don't understand the why. They just think they're going in. They have to tell you what they had to do. You got a project manager came in. He's like, I need you to status your work. It's never the point of a stand-up. And so for me, I think that's part of the problem. And so I always encourage my development teams to take back your stand-up. Take back the goal of it, which was alignment. It always was alignment. It's about finding where you need help and asking for and having an opportunity to do that. I've worked with teams who, they found themselves so fluid in terms of how they work. They're super close. They maintain a constant chat, whether it be in Slack or Teams, wherever they were at. Their data was up to date to the point where they self-select and says, you know what, we don't think, the things we're talking about throughout the day are the same things we're bringing up there. So that stand-up is actually becoming stale. And the moment your stand-up becomes stale because you're already talking about those things, You don't need one anymore. But if you're just trying to get rid of a meeting, this is what I mean by when I said earlier, not all meetings are bad. Bad meetings are bad. Stand-ups can be a really valuable meeting for again, alignment. If you feel aligned, get rid of the meeting. If you don't, keep the meeting. But make sure there is intention and purpose to it. Understand why you're having it, what the whole goal is. It's not to give your project manager an update. And if, again, that's what they're asking for, take it back. Take back your stand-up.
That's a really great point. What couple of things we do at grid.io to help get rid of those meetings is we don't schedule them every day. We don't feel the need that we have to have them every day. So usually it's 2 to 3 times a week. But I love the point of if everybody's aligned, just get rid of the meeting. So if there is a meeting and we're all aligned, we could just cancel for that day. I think that's something we could actually start doing internally moving forward. So I absolutely love that point.
Yeah. And make sure you have those opportunities to reflect too. And so this is where maybe it's a retro or it's some sort of opportunity to come back and say, hey, do we still feel that? So you might get rid of them for a month and then come back and be like, do we still feel healthy? Do we feel like we're aligned? And if people come like, yeah, like we're doing great, awesome, keep going. But if all of a sudden people are like, or the team has noticed drift, I mean, like, well, I thought you were working on that. And I'm like, well, we had to wait. I had to wait 3 days to find out that I was on the wrong thing. Then those are little signs for you to not necessarily say, bring the stand-up back. The goal is not, again, to just apply the hammer again. It's to say, let's dive into that. And the solution could be, hey, maybe we need some sort of sync up once or twice a week. That maybe prevents enough drift. Awesome. And so to your point, make the call as you're going and then be open to that reflection as you go.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, well, diving back into the process of actually being able to have your action items after the meeting, let me describe our process and then feel free to roast our process and tell us where we could do better.
I'm sure it's great.
It's a little, it could be better. So
see, that's the mentality you need to have.
So most of our meetings, we will have a pre-defined agenda, not necessarily for stand-ups. Stand-ups are, fairly typical, but if it's like a marketing meeting, if it's a development meeting, we have very specific goals. We'll always map out the agenda prior, and we'll hit all the talking points that we want to chat about. And then during the meeting, we'll take action points to actually implement after the call. Those action points live in Confluence along with the agenda on the same page. And then from there, and this is the part we could probably do a little bit better at, but we'll pull those out into like Jira tasks if they're bigger initiatives. The biggest pain point for us, and I guess the biggest challenge, is what is an action item, what is a Jira task, and which do you leave as an action item versus pull out as a Jira task?
Yeah. So this is a very interesting thing because I don't think there is a right answer for this. What it comes down to is the team aligning on what they believe that should be. So I'm a big advocate of team working agreements, and I think one of the big areas you talk about in a working agreement is just like you outlined. Here are the rituals or the meetings we have. Here's the agenda for those meetings. And then coming into that, if all of a sudden you find a spot where you're like, we're unsure of what to do, and maybe we're doing slightly different things, this is a great area to say, all right, cool, team. So let's look back at some of the tasks that we had for the last week or two and which ones we had in Confluence versus which ones we moved to Jira, and say, is there any commonality we see? Or do we want to draw some sort of line and saying, well, if it's tied to the work, we should make it a task. If it is a side desk administrative thing, it's something that stays in Confluence. Or you may, as a team, someone may on the team say, I can't keep track, because I know a lot of teams who are I hate keeping track of tasks in 2 places. I've got my Confluence task and I've got my Jira task. I just want a board. Some of the teams I've worked with says, all right, cool. Every task that we do that's more than 30 minutes or something like that, we're going to put it in Confluence or in Jira, and we're going to tag it a certain way. We're going to make it a certain issue type or something like that. That way they can still bring up their own personal view of this is my backlog. But again, it's based on the team. And so what I encourage all teams to do is have that conversation, because that is one of those things where it can bite you in the butt real fast if you're starting to track in multiple places, because you again get that drift of all those activities, and you're like, oh, I forgot to do that until the next meeting, when all of a sudden you bring up all the checkboxes that are unchecked. So that's the way I've kind of looked at it, is again looking at that. So I don't think what you all are doing is incorrect. I think what the thing is just taking that next step to say, all right, which one should we be intentional about for being in Jira versus in Confluence?
Mm-hmm. That's a great process to implement. But we'll have to try that out. Yeah, because we just pretty much pull out anything that's slightly larger and throw that into Jira. And then if it's a smaller task, we'll leave it in Confluence. But I love the idea of looking at that after the fact, and maybe a month later, look at all of your action items versus Jira tasks, what worked, what didn't, and kind of reevaluate.
Yeah, you might find a common thread all of a sudden. You're like, oh, look at that. Like, we were all intuitively doing it this way. Now you can call it out and be intentional. So that way it never feels like you're just kind of guessing.
That's a great point, yeah. That brings us into the next thing, which is kind of templatizing your meetings, whether that's ticket templates or agenda templates. Any suggestions or pieces of advice that you have for that whole arena?
Templates are an amazing tool for us. The way we look at templates is they are the manifestation of process, and that's why they're so powerful. And so for me, this is where, and this is for a lot of people out there who may not be at that point of having like good agendas or things like that. Don't feel like you have to like move from like that crawl to fly state, being like, oh man, I'm right here. How do I get there? Start with the intermediate, and the best place to do that, use the templates that we already have in Confluence. Meeting notes templates, for example. It's a great template that I always encourage my customers to work with, where basically it will give you, hey, what's your purpose of the meeting? What are the goals that you have? Here's an agenda, fill it out. It doesn't have to take long either. It take you 5-10 minutes to populate that. And what it will do then is you can then use that template as a page to essentially say, cool, this is how we're going to structure our meeting. So that way it's not completely fluid. It's something that we put a few guardrails around. And then if you really like that and you find that you're starting to maybe adjust that template to work, use that as a base to create your own templates for your meetings, because you will find that, each meeting is likely a little different, but they all share those core elements. Like for me, it's always, when I think about a good meeting, it's one that has a purpose, that has specific goals, that has an agenda with, time boxes and things like that. Even if we're brainstorming, like people ask me all the time, you're like, how do we do an open brainstorm? It's like, well, then you just intentionally say, we're going to spend 30 minutes during this chunk doing brainstorming. And then you say how you're going to do that. Because it's the worst thing in the world is going into a session and say, let's brainstorm, and everyone just looks at each other and be like, how are we brainstorming? No, just write it down. No, that's the facilitator's job. They've got to make sure that you call out how are you going to go doing it, because there's likely stuff you need to do after that too, like aggregation and next steps. And then of course, just that, make sure at the end of every agenda you do lay out those next steps. What are the things we have to do? Who's doing it? By when? And every meeting has that flow. And if you go through that flow and you think about it at a high level, you'll actually find yourself having more effective meetings at the end of the day. So templates are a great way to start. And again, if you go into Confluence, you go and create a new page, you look at templates, you just look at meeting notes, it's there. And you just start using that right off the bat. And it's easy.
I love that you brought up goals. That is something that I struggle with, especially when setting up a meeting agenda, because let's say we set up a marketing meeting, we have like 5 completely different points we're going to hit on. How do I define a goal for that particular meeting? Like, we're going to hit so many different aspects of marketing that I don't know if we're narrowing down into one specific goal.
So I think this is, again, one of those things where it's like regular goals, where we're like, we have to make this big lofty goal that makes it feel like we've moved the world after this, thing. But the thing is let's say you're getting a meeting together. There's a reason you're getting that meeting together. And so you think about it. I always say, it's like, think about it. If at the end of this meeting, what do you want? Where do you want to be? What do you want to feel? And those start representing those initial goals. You might just say, our goal is that we're aligned around these 5 initiatives. And we got a thumbs up from everybody at the end. That could be as simple as your goal. If it is like looking at 5 campaigns, if it's brainstorming, you might say, I need one idea coming out of here that we can go run with. It doesn't have to be some monumental thing, but what it needs to be is like, there's a reason you set up that meeting. what is the outcome for it that you were hoping for? And that outcome essentially can represent that initial goal for you. And then again, as you're doing, you can start refining it. And actually what you start doing then too is when you start struggling with that, when you start saying, look, why are we doing that? It is actually a sign from the universe, I like to say, that is basically telling you, do you need that meeting, or are you just doing this meeting? Because if you can't come up with a goal, if it was like, well, we got a couple people that are going to present some topics, and we're going to cover some things. Well, why are you doing that? I don't know. We're just, we need to present those topics. Why are you? Well, again, I'll ask it again. Why do you need to cover those topics? Is there something else that you could do, like record a Loom video to help share that concept out there? Because if the goal can't be articulated for the meeting, it's a sign that maybe we need to approach this from a different angle. Maybe it is more of a one-way share versus a discussion or a collaboration, which is what a meeting should be.
Mm-hmm. So jumping into Loom, which is one of my favorite tools, and one of the reasons I take less meetings, and one of the things I use to take less meetings, let me give some strategies around how I tend to look at when I could avoid a meeting versus, we need to have the meeting. And then I'd love to hear your thoughts and your opinions, what you could add to that. So there's kind of three things that I look at. If I look at a potential meeting that may need to happen, I'll look at if it could be done via email. Then I'll look at if it could be done via either Slack, chat, or maybe like comments in Confluence or Jira tickets, something along those lines. And then the third thing is send a Loom. Each of those will probably take, I guess email and Slack and comments are a little bit more debatable, but Loom would probably take a little bit more time to record versus a couple of chats back and forth. But I'll look at those three options for myself, and I'll determine whether or not it's going to be shorter or longer to take a meeting. And then you kind of have to double it because your meeting's at least with a couple of people, so you're wasting two people's time. So you have to double whatever the time that you're spending on that call. So let's say a task that we need to discuss is going to be a 30-minute meeting, but instead I could record a Loom and do it in under 10 minutes. Instantly, to me, that's like no brainer, no need for a meeting unless we have something very in-depth that's going to be very nuanced that we need to talk through and walk through. So that's kind of where I go by default. If it's less time and if it's easier for me to do it async, I do that first. And then if we can't figure it out, or if it takes longer than that, that's when I consider scheduling a call. What are your thoughts?
No, and I think you hit it on right there at the end. What is it that you're trying to get out of it in terms of you're thinking async first, and if you can't accomplish what you're looking to accomplish from an async perspective, you then start adding the layers in. You start saying, all right, cool, comment, cool. If that's just a back and forth, it could be a quick chat, in Slack or Teams or whatever it is, and you get your question answered. But it's almost with the ambiguity or the details that you need to share that you start coming to that point where you potentially need the meeting. And for me, I think a big threshold thing there is, again, that level of collaboration. And that's what we use too, is when we look at that, and if a lot of information sharing, and even there's some light collaboration there, like we want to get opinions and ideas, Loom's a great tool because you can have the conversation within that video. But if you kind of need to go back and forth, and you need to have the kind of, the ideas building on top of each other, those are areas where the meetings themselves start adding a ton of value. Because again, it becomes almost, although you might save time, you might have a perception of saved time, at the end of the day, the idea you get to, is it X amount? Is it as good as you may have gotten if you had done it in person, kind of, or not in person, but just like a digital sync setting? And this is, to me, I always go back in, what was it, 2023, I think it was. Shopify did this whole big, I kind of say it's a little bit of a PR stunt, but I think it was intended to actually help save time. Is they just had a bot go through everyone's calendar and cancel all their meetings. I think what was it? I had a stat on this at some point. It was like 322,000 hours of meetings were canceled for a month. And the whole idea was let's try from an async perspective. We're not going to do meetings. The thing is after that month, their whole goal at first was saving time. The problem with that being the only goal is saving time is they don't think about the quality or the validity of the outcomes at the end. And so for them, they didn't necessarily, they had to learn some async practices that helped them in the long run. But a lot of those meetings came back because they found that, there's one thing to cancel a meeting, but does that really accomplish my goal? And so as you mentioned, I think that's the most important thing is it's not necessarily about the time, it's about the outcome. And if you can get to that outcome with an async first perspective and start async first and work your way up to it, amazing. And again, Loom's I found that it used to be a lot more of especially for us in Atlassian, it used to be a lot more of a hurdle before Loom where you would have chat or you'd have a Confluence page. And it was like you made it about 20% of the way there, and then there was this delta before you got to a sync meeting, kind of thing. And I think what Loom has done is it's kind of neutralized that middle ground a little bit to say, hey, you have something more than just a Confluence page trying to articulate your thoughts. I literally will, and this is my feedback for everyone doing Looms out there. Don't treat it like a webinar or recording. Treat it as a phone call you may have had with somebody who just couldn't pick up the phone. Go in and I always say, if you got to record more than once, you're doing it wrong. Because the idea is that you're like, I got this idea, I'm trying to articulate it. It's the same thing you would have said in a meeting or on the phone with somebody. That is the value of using Loom that way. And that's why we become so prolific with it. Is it wasn't about making it look pretty. It wasn't about being like, well, I gotta send this video, it's gonna look great. No, it was about sharing the idea. And that became almost a snowball internally that allowed us to, again, fill that delta so that we didn't always need that meeting. And so that's helped us out tremendously.
Yeah, and with the Loom AI stuff, I feel like it makes it way easier, at least for myself. When I just started, like, it definitely is something you have to practice, get used to, and you definitely get better at over time. Just turning on that Loom, recording, and then afterwards cuts out all those little the little buts, the little silent moments.
And people can, and even outside of AI, being able to listen to it like at 2x speed, like that's usually what I do. All of a sudden, I can consume that data fairly quickly, and if I need to pause it and go back, I can. But I'm sitting there and I'm allowing it to be consumed while I'm maybe looking at some content that they're giving me. But it gives me the ability to consume at a pace that my brain can consume versus the pace that you can convey, because I might be able to consume it a little bit faster.
Yeah, I find myself always speeding it up just because I feel like people just talk slow for me, and I could just get the same info twice as fast, and it's kind of a no-brainer at that point. I know a lot of people even do that with like a YouTube video or a podcast. But yeah, Loom is like a cheat code. You just talk into it, you send it to someone, and what if you send it to 20 people? That's like so much time saved for 20 people, twice as fast. It's a little bit more exponential than just one individual listening to it.
100%. And I will say to people out there, if they're not using Loom, they're like, well, we can't use Loom, but you're using like a Slack or a Teams, don't feel like you have to absolutely use Loom. Loom, I think, is a superior product, but both those other products, a lot of the messaging products have those video features out there. Experiment using that video. See if that can help you remove some meetings simply by conveying your thoughts through a video or an audio recording. It's amazing what that can start unlocking. And like I said, as you get through there, you can then start looking into products like Loom, because again, things like Loom AI and the ability to actually stitch a bunch of things together, plus the ability, of course, when we think about Confluence and our whole integrated search, like the thing you just talked about in a recorded Loom is now indexed and available to you in Confluence search, and someone can find that. That's where the power starts coming about, is now you can start being like, oh yeah, Josh talked about this in a Loom video last year, and now I found that in my search, and I can now listen to that or go through and it will extract that concept out and allow me to bring it somewhere else. That's where the superpower will come in. But if you need to start somewhere, feel free to start with what you have, because there's a lot of great power with that video technology.
Great point. Bit of an uncomfortable question here. So let's say you need to respectfully decline a meeting. How do you do that, especially when it's like, let's say your boss or someone who's, obviously above the food chain. You have to somehow back out because either you're not going to be valuable there, or it's just not worth the time.
So this is where it gets interesting, especially if it's with a superior and like your boss or someone like that. I think with something in that sort of situation, the goal comes into kind of seeking what you need. And so in that case, your boss drops a meeting on your calendar for Thursday for an hour, and it says project updates, and that's all it says. It's in the title, and the description is empty. What you can come to your boss with is saying, hey, I need a little bit more context to make sure this meeting is valuable, both for you as well as for me. And then ask for what are the things you need. And you know what the things you need are? Probably things like, hey, you said project updates, but what's your goal at the end of the session? Are there specific updates you want to have covered? And is there certain people we need to make sure are there? So you're getting into a little bit of agenda. And then it's like, and then at that point, when you're in that, is there anything we need to make sure we're prepared for going into it? And then, of course, in the session, you can then go and say, like, well, let's make sure we have some next steps and we kind of cover those out. For me, I think you can diplomatically have those conversations. Now, I will say, and I think there's something to be said about this, is you can also say, especially with your direct leader or your team, is say, I need these sorts of things in order to attend that meeting. If I don't have these things, I'm going to self-select out. And it can be a very uncomfortable thing to say, but you can't just, I always say, I hate it when people will say, well, I'm not attending that meeting. It doesn't make sense for me. There's nothing in there. And I says, well, that's unfair. You need to go and ask them to say, hey, could you consider adding these sorts of things? Because this is what I need to know whether or not it's going to be worth my time. And at that point, it starts a really good conversation around, all right, when we set up meetings, maybe we should make sure we have this sort of thing in there. Always feel comfortable, I say, willing to ask for what you need. Because if you don't ask for that, you might go in and then all of a sudden it's going to be one of those 72% of meetings, that I talked about being ineffective. You'll go in and it was a complete waste of your time. But if you don't ask, it's almost on you at that point. Like, you gotta make sure you ask.
Yeah. So from my perspective, it's a little bit different because I don't take a lot of meetings like internally. We try to reduce that, but I work with a lot of clients that sometimes love meetings. So one of the non-confrontational ways I like to negate the meeting entirely is, let's say we have something going on, some kind of due date, deadline project, and they're like, okay, let's schedule a call for this time. And we put the call in the books, and before that day hits, I'll just do everything. I'll record the Loom, I'll send it over, and at the end of the Loom, I'll just say, hey, if you still feel like we need the meeting, great. If everything's covered, we're good to go. And most of the time, majority of the time, everything's already covered. There's really nothing else to go after go over on that next call. So we could just cancel the call together. That I don't know if that'll work in like a boss employee situation, but with client,
I'd say try it though. I mean, I would say try, because we use that a lot with our customers as well. That same approach where it's like, all right, we finished something, or I need to share something, or they ask for something. I will send them a Loom, same kind of way. I'll send it to them, and then says, if you still want to go deeper, we need to collaborate and go back and forth on this. Like, let's set up some time. But if you just had questions you needed to get answered, and this did it for you, awesome. I don't, I think it's I think you don't want to do it for like every meeting you have with internally or even externally. It's being very intentful about what those are, because I think about some people be like, man, I am just going to send Looms for everything. I'm like, there's some things like and again, we even talk about how we distinguish between what should be sync and versus what should be async, and it's going to be based on that purpose. If a meeting is designed to dig into next steps on a project, or if it's designed to do a one-on-one with your boss or something like that, or if it's just a team meeting, something we call it intentional togetherness time, some team time together. It's coming up, and again, going back to things like that working agreement I talked about, coming up with what meetings we want to make sure are like, these should stay sync, and these type of meetings we should go async first with.
Yeah, those are great points. Something that I like to do is, I guess it depends on the type of people. I think it's very interesting to see where we have projects that are 6 months, huge projects, but the team we're working with is like not very meeting heavy, and we'll meet like twice, and the project goes super well, super smooth, no problems. And then you have like a project half the size that they're wanting a meeting once or twice a week at least. So it's very interesting to kind of see that dynamic between different companies and organizations. But ultimately, I feel like there's no difference between the actual end result and the process. It's really just staying, in sync asynchronously, whether that's emails, chat updates. But as long as everybody's in the loop, end result tends to be the same, at least from my perspective, working on these projects.
It goes right back to that first conversation we had about stand-ups, and it's as simple as that. It's about alignment. The whole purpose, of a meeting is alignment, and it's at the degree of alignment that you need is where you need to determine whether or not it is a video, a Slack message, or let's all get together on a phone, on a phone call kind of thing, or get onto a Zoom or something like that. Because at the end of the day, that's why they're there. It's just having that sort of conversation, like having that ability to make sure you're on the same page. And if you are, fantastic. Like you said, I know some people. We had a team member here in Atlassian who ran a whole marketing campaign project without any meetings. But what they use is they got really intentful. It says, all right, we're going to send each other updates via Loom. We're going to stay in constant contact via Slack. I referenced over here because that's where my Slack is. Like they're going to go through and that's how they're going to stay in alignment. And so from that, they were able to actually execute on having this kind of meetingless project, and it worked out really well for them. But you have to be intentional about that. If you're just gonna kind of wing it, again, that's where you start moving into. And one of the issues with many of the workspace tools that are like calendar driven is that it's so easy to then just set up that meeting, and you set it up, and now all of a sudden, without any kind of guardrails for why and who and when, kind of thing like that. And so if you get intentional about when you're meeting, why you would meet, all of a sudden those decisions don't become whimsy. They become very clear. I'm like, all right, I'm setting up a meeting because we agree that these are the things that we needed to meet about.
That's great. So we've avoided all the meetings. Now let's say we have to have a call. What is your favorite way to structure that call from start to finish?
So I think, a big thing for me, I am one of those individuals who like to, and this is, you got to read the room as a facilitator, whether this is going to be cool, but I always like to start off with a little bit of that banter, a little bit making sure that, we're getting, we're everyone's kind of loosening up. So I'll, especially when we do have larger meetings or things that are a regular basis, I would do this when I used to run daily scrums and daily stand-ups too. I have some sort of icebreaker question. I'm a big fan of those, and I will say, it's got to be an intentional icebreaker question. It's got to be something, it's not just something you randomly picked. It's got to be something that you want to, get people thinking about in the meeting itself. So if you had to make a hard decision, you might ask an icebreaker question that has to deal with making a hard decision. These are things that you start with. So try to build in some energy at the beginning. And then for me, of course, it's using that agenda to drive that. I think, of course, you use a template like we have in Confluence. You'll go through and it's like you started out with laying out the goals for the session. Make sure we're all aligned on the goals. Talk about where we're going. And then, of course, at the end, make sure we've saved that 5-10 minutes aside for next steps and actions, because so often that gets missed. That's that piece. And so as I run through that, it's making sure I'm staying honest to that. The other thing I always think about when running a meeting, and again, if some people might be like, wow, these are big meetings must be. It's like, no, this could be a small meeting. This could be something that's 5 people together, but you want to be thinking intentional about that time. And so the other things I always think about is like, make sure that if it's your meeting and you're running it, that you're being very intentional about wearing that facilitator hat, because one of the biggest issues I see that happens when someone who owns the agenda and facilitation is also a big contributor to it, is that they will find themselves, just completely bypassing the time boxes or the topics and going into something that they're passionate about or start talking to. And so for me, it's always being really intentional about the role you play. And if you need to hand off facilitation for a moment, do that. Make sure someone's honoring your time boxes, because if you start blowing through time boxes and you're not asking the team whether or not we want to, and you're just doing it, you're finding yourself in a spot where the meeting's going to become less effective. So again, as I like to think about it, again, start it out. I always like to start with a human moment. Those were the icebreakers or something like that. Talk about where you're going, what you're trying to accomplish. get into that meet. Make sure you have good facilitation in there that allows you to hit those goals at the end. And at the end, always make sure you have 5 or 10 minutes. I would even lean on if you're notoriously always going over, or you're never getting to your next steps and action items, I say save 10 minutes at the end. That way you can guarantee you'll get to those items before the end of that session.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Here's a question. I'll dive into some of these, but here's one that kind of relates to how meetings should be structured. But there's a question about running daily stand-ups, and generally it's said that it should be around 2 minutes per person. Let's say 2 to 5 at most, just in case there's some in-depth stuff to get into. But if your meetings are going over by a lot, how do you keep them more efficient?
I think it's getting really intentional about the questions you ask and what you need to cover. So like a great example is like you mentioned, like 2 to 5 minutes for like a daily stand up, for talking about what I'm doing. That is a huge amount of variance. And if you've got a team of 10 people, you're going from a 20 to a 50-minute meeting potentially. And so one of the things I would always do with my teams is that we got very intentional about the questions we needed to ask. We would play around with the same, the standard questions. What did you work on yesterday? What are you working on today? Do you have any blockers or things you need to dive deeper in? And the big thing as a facilitator for like something like that we would have is we'd say, all right, when I think about my meeting, I wouldn't just save 15 minutes and put it on the calendar. I would save 30 and say the first 15 is designed in my agenda to be that quick update to the alignment session for ourselves. And then anything that we need help with, we need to dive deeper into, we reserve that last 15 minutes to do it. Because 9 times out of 10, I find that those topics that we need to dive deeper into don't require the full team. This goes back into like allowing people to determine whether or not they need to be there. And so if we can get through the alignment exercise, we can then go into the deep dive section in that last 15 minutes and actually spend with the right people, saying like, all right, so-and-so has a topic they brought up. Who wants to be here for that? Everyone's like, half the team says, well, I want to be there for that. The other rest of you can all drop off at this point. Like, we don't need you to be like, wasting any of your time here. So for me, it's being intentional about how we think about those groupings. It's easy to say, oh, we'll just, we can go in those variances. But if you allow that variance for too long, you will find yourself in a spot where either you don't get through everybody, or you're rushing everybody at the end, or that meeting is just overwhelmingly long.
Mm-hmm. Another follow-up to that, and if anybody else has questions in the chat, feel free to drop them. We'll do our best to answer them. Kind of the opposite on that spectrum, right? What if you have a long meeting that you can't get around, let's say a 2-hour meeting? What is the best way to keep people engaged?
I think for me, it's making sure, one, that if it's a 2-hour meeting, it should be a meeting that, one, we should all be engaged in and involved with, meaning that it's not someone talking to me. If someone's just talking to me, then it's that topic should be moved off to an async form. But if it's needing to brainstorm ideas or get everyone engaged, what I usually say is, as a facilitator, is you need to find mechanisms and use practices to get everybody engaged. So that way, again, we all feel like we're contributing to that time. I'm a big fan of a set of practices called liberating structures that gives you the ability, that it helps a facilitator kind of get to an outcome by doing some creative brainstorming and problem solving sort of practices. Basically, whether it be something like one practice is called 1, 2, 4 all, where everyone gets to contribute an idea and we kind of pair up and then pair up, to things like fishbowl exercises, which allow people to tag in and out. The whole goal, though, is to make sure that, again, it's not just 1 or 2 people dominating a conversation and the rest of the room is just sitting there waiting for it to be over. It's truly making sure that whatever technique you're, like, if you're going to go in and spend some time collaborating or brainstorming or sparring, that you as a facilitator have brought in techniques to help ensure the whole team can be involved with that. And if you didn't, then you're going to find yourself in a spot where you got people being like, man, that was a waste of my time. That was just Josh and Jennifer are going off on this topic, and myself, I just sat there because I had no dogs in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great points. I think that does kind of happen a lot. People kind of tend to shift into a one-on-one conversation with other individuals there. That's a pet peeve of mine. If I'm in a meeting and I'm like, man, it's been like 20 minutes now and I've added no value, I should leave, but I feel awkward leaving.
What I always say is those are great meetings to, if you find yourself in those recurring, use those as observation moments and looking at the topics and things like that. Because what you might find is that one, either, this type of, like, we need to get clear on the goals or the purpose, because if that might have determined whether or not he needed to be there. Or two, we might find that if it is purely someone sharing a concept and then someone else is just kind of asking questions, that might be a great opportunity for a Loom video, because we find that it's maybe a single topic being shared with some light interaction versus like an actual back and forth, like going through the topic. You might find, be like, all right, the next time let's experiment with running that kind of topic as a Loom. And so this is where for me, I always encourage teams, don't just blow up everything, but like take something and be like, all right, let's experiment with that. Maybe this can be an async piece, or maybe we need to introduce a practice here, or what if, and I think, what is it, Conway's law is we'll fill the space we have. We'll always take 2 hours in a meeting, unless we are much more intentional with our structure. And so if you give yourself now, if your structure tells you should take an hour, take an hour. Don't do 2. And then see if you can get through that. And if you can't, learn from it. Be like, all right, we were too aggressive here. These are things we need to spend more time on. The next time we'll increase that, but then make sure that we're doing it for an intentional reason.
Great points. Yeah. Another question here, very specific about team culture. I think this one hits home for a lot of people. I think a lot of companies associate culture with meeting. But the question is essentially, how do you retain that culture without necessarily having meetings or very few meetings? Any strategies or approaches you've seen that are great?
Yeah, and again, I'll go back to Atlassian as a really good example of this as we've grown. I mean, shoot, when I've been here for 5 years, and we were 2,000 people when I joined. We're nearly 14,000 people now. And of course, we've continued to distribute around the world. And so we're at a very again, we're very distributed culture, so it can't be meeting heavy on us. So we're very asynchronously focused. I think in order to maintain, how you show up in things like your Looms, how you show up in the content you share, are ways that you can continue to solidify that culture. Because the culture is the norms in your organization. It is the beliefs or the values you have. And so if you come across and you're still, like for us, for example, open company, no bullshit is one of our core values at Atlassian. Mike Cannon-Brooks, our CEO, he will send us, instead of doing a regular weekly town hall, he'll send us a video, a Loom video and a Confluence page talking about where things are at with our business right now. And he doesn't, and again, for him, he doesn't hold back. He shares exactly how it is. And again, for him, it's like, let's open up. But then the other side of that coin is that we show up then by asking questions on those, by him then responding back, by having that continuous dialogue. It doesn't necessarily need to be us all coming together. It's like your culture isn't defined by your happy hour, it's defined by your interactions. And so if we can interact with each other the same way and have those same values that are kind of holding us or rooting us, we can still maintain that culture that we feel like our meetings were driving.
That's great. I love that you said it's not defined by like a happy hour, not one moment, not one meeting. It's like your whole, how you interact with people on a day-to-day basis. That's really great.
What is it they say is culture is not what people, it's not the thing that people see, it's the things that people don't see. I think that's the whole idea. It's how you show up when you don't think anybody's looking. And that doesn't take a meeting to show that.
Great points. Yeah. Last one here. So I think I can help answer this one partially, and then I think you can help with the AI part. But any tools or automations that are great for like weekly, daily team meetings to align. One thing that we do is initially actually just started automating a page to auto create a week ahead of our meeting. That way we can start dropping stuff in there throughout the week as things come up. Then I found this really cool tool. Let me see if I could find the name of it, because I don't quite remember what it was called, but it essentially did that for us. It's called Medical. It's a calendar app in Confluence, and it pretty much links to your recurring meetings and auto creates those pages for you with context, with templates, all that kind of stuff. It even adds your to-do or action items from previous meetings up into the current meeting. So that's a really, really great way that I found to do it. But automation is really great too, just being able to set up a template to be created ahead of time to start filling that out. I think that's one of the key things that's really helped us.
I love that, and I think the automation that's a huge piece. Where again, make it easy for yourself. If you're going to always have a meeting at this point, have that template automatically created for you. Added the date, add the normal participants, whatever it is, so that way it's not hard, it's not difficult. And then, kind of going back to the question then too about AI-driven features with some of this, one of the nice things again is with Rovo and our integrated Atlassian kind of search that we have. Using AI on that, we can go through and ask, say, hey, summarize this meeting for me, and it will go through and it'll give you the action items, a summary, who's responsible for it. You can also ask it to then go ahead and can you assign these folks, going back to our task conversation, assign these folks these tasks in this Jira project. And it will go in, it will create those for you. And so for us, it's about eliminating the things that honestly, especially at the end of a meeting, that would normally get missed because we moved on to something else. It's that summary. It's the notes. So using like Loom right now we use internally to as a note taker guest. I invite it to my Zoom meetings. It takes all the notes. It figures out the action items. I can then have Atlassian and Rovo go and assign those off to folks. Getting those things that normally would take time and thus get missed, those are things that now we're allowing the AI to take care of for us. And so if you're using Loom or you're using Atlassian Cloud, I encourage you to go play around with how those the meeting note taker functionality works in Loom, or how the auto assign tasks AI functionality works within like tools like Rovo. Those are great ways to kind of again save your time, but then make sure that the time was worth it because you took care of those final steps of the meeting that tend to get missed.
That's great. That's really great. All right. Well, as we wrap up here, Mark, what is your hottest meeting take that you think is very controversial?
I am a big believer in the aspect that everyone on a meeting should be optional. So for me, if I have a meeting, I think everybody, I've actually told people to do this. I do it a couple times myself when I want to make a point. What was that?
What if it's a one-on-one?
See, even there, and the reason I say it is that it is up to you as the meeting organizer to sell that meeting to somebody. And if they're optional, that means for them, they have to determine whether or not that's a good usage of their time. If it's required, it feels like there's a barrier. But if they're optional, and then it's up to you to make sure. So if you set up a meeting, no description, no clear title, and you made everyone optional, I always ask, how many people do you think will show up if everybody is optional? And the thing is people try that, and they find that not as many would show up as they did when they were required. And so what it does is it starts putting the ownership on you as the organizer to get better at making the business case. Just like we said earlier, every moment that we have a meeting is costing money, and it's not just my time, it's somebody else, or maybe it's someone else's. So how do you justify that? And by doing that, you do it by, good goals, good agenda, be clear on that. And like I said, if you want to take it that one step further, try it out, make everyone optional, see what happens.
I love the concept of selling the meeting, because then you're required to encourage others to come and actually feel like they're going to be valued and their time is well spent.
100%.
So yeah, I love that.
What about you? What's your hot take, Josh? What's the thing that's the controversial thing for you?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think that just pretty much 99% of meetings are probably not very necessary, or like not 100% necessary, and can be done outside of the meeting. I think meetings help and can help speed up a process, but for the most part, they're not required for everything.
Yeah.
So kind of the same
way that
way
return on investment worth it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if it's worth the return on investment, then it's worth the meeting. But it's not as if you can't do it outside of the call. Is it worth the time for the call?
I love it. I love it.
I don't know how hot of a take that is, but that's probably mine.
But it's something we all need to do. That's the thing.
Yeah,